Hi, Lynn. Thanks for joining me today.
Gary, thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show. I'm honored.
Honoured, I'm not so sure about, but yeah, it's great to have you here. Maybe if you can give a little bit about you and your history in your journey in Bitcoin.
Yeah, highlights. Importantly, Bitcoiner since 2013 was first introduced to it in 2012, late 2012. So I wasn't typical of my kind of demographic where it took me 18 attempts and multiple touch points. I kind of jumped right in. But I think it was a reason for that was my convergence of a background in traditional finance and then living in an emerging economy in Mexico and just seeing, how Bitcoin, was really interesting and was able to maybe fix some of the things that I'd seen that were going wrong. But yeah, I live in Mexico City. Involved, I have a podcast with a co-host, Israel Munoz. It's called Build with Bitcoin, that explores startups and that are building the future of Bitcoin infrastructure and the investors that support them. I'm a partner in Base Layer Advisors, which works with high net worth individuals, family offices, and private companies on developing a Bitcoin strategy. And I'm also a partner in the Casa de Satoshi, which is a Bitcoin space that we opened in November 2024 in Mexico City for kind of co-working, events, knowledge exchange. So those are my three Bitcoin kind of activities at the moment.
Sounds like we might need one of those 3-hour podcasts to cover all of that.
Now we can
But
get through this. Yeah.
yeah, I'm really keen, like I am with all my guests, to go back to your earliest memories of money before we move on to Bitcoin.
Yeah. I anticipated you asking this question. And it really caused me to think about it. And I guess I was always really interested in money and how money kind of progressed. I mean, I was thinking back to my best friend when I was a little girl, like probably 8, 10 years old, Sherry Bell. And we had this B&B Enterprises, we called it. And we sold everything to all of our poor neighbors. Every other week, we'd have a different activity that we'd wash cars or we'd sell decorated soaps or who knows what. But, so I guess I had a little entrepreneurial streak in me from the very beginning. But grew up solidly middle class. Probably my parents were aspirational in the neighborhood they chose for us because I did see that some of my neighbors and friends had more than we had, and my family was solidly on a budget. But I think they gave me a really good foundation about understanding and appreciating money. And my sisters and I had to earn our money. We had chores, and if we needed extra money, we could do extra chores to earn it to buy what we wanted. So I think that laid a foundation. But when I guess it was like fifth or sixth grade, I took an optional summer school course that was how to read the stock market. And my parents weren't investors in the stock market, but my dad took me and taught me how to read the stock market pages and kind of the concept of investing in companies. And he said, and there was a prize at the end of summer school. So he said, well, what do you know? What do you use? And then, I picked out like Disney World and Colgate toothpaste and things like that to invest in. And for whatever reason, I think it was Disney, my portfolio, the prize. And so I just was certain I was just meant for Wall Street, destined for big things and investing. But it was really from a very early age, I was extremely interested in that world and selected economics as a major for college. So I could learn more about it and kind of be positioned to be in that world.
And in terms of economics at college, was that the
Keynesian,
very,
pure.
yeah, pure Keynesian?
Now that I'm a Bitcoiner, I know how probably worthless that education was in terms of the real world.
How do you reflect back on that now? Like genuinely, the however many 3 years at college that you spent learning that, do you see still value from it, or from the experience that you gained in just growing as a person in the university in a college environment, or do you think you wish you'd done something else?
Well, actually, because I was so impatient to get into the working world, my education was different than most. So I left high school. I graduated a year early from high school, and then I exempted out of 2 years of college. So I essentially was 3 years ahead of my normal class in getting out of college and getting into the work world, and I kind of doubled up on courses. So I was out really early. And I didn't really have the college experience of the networks and I mean, I just couldn't wait to get out and get to work. And so, I was a good learner. I could read a book, retain a lot of it, and pass a test. So I can't say that I really immersed myself in the learning experience as much as I did in the test taking and move on. But I think my biggest experience was then when I finally was able to get a job at Merrill Lynch, and I used to go down there like every 6 months and apply for a job, and until I turned 20. I mean, you had to be 21 to have a broker's license, and was hired as a sales assistant or basically a secretary, to work with some senior brokers, and really learned so much. And taking my Series 7, I got my Series 7 the month I turned 21. And just in this particular group, one was a gold bug, which was unusual, but learned a lot. And now I'm thinking back on him and all the sound money principles that he talked about. One was an options trader, another was a financial planner, and one was a value stock investor. And so as a group, it was really a well-rounded education about investing and taking a longer time period. And I ended up getting into that partnership after I got my Series 7, and stock index options were just coming on board. And so I had kind of an interesting play of stock index options, and also just playing around with capturing a lot of assets on money markets. I mean, at the time, the interest rate environment, we were able to pay like 20% interest on money market funds when banks were limited to 5.5. It was very easy to capture assets and bring them in. But I learned a lot there. I learned a lot more by doing. And so I think my friends, keep their kids away from me, because I'm not one to encourage a lengthy college career, even at any point. I just think it's better to do instead of to listen to other people's teach you.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like the college route for you was the means to the end, rather than, it was just, how can I get through this as quickly as possible to get a
Exactly,
job and
Gary.
earn some money? I think that's why a lot of people, other than the cost of university, as it's called in the UK, or college, the college experience, a lot of people in this country are now moving more towards apprenticeships, because you get the education alongside real work experience, because that's critical, isn't it? If you spend too long just in education, that leap into the workplace is sometimes quite a tricky one.
It is. And the other thing I kind of learned in that journey, because I did eventually move to New York with Merrill Lynch, and then it was a time when Merrill Lynch was moving their head offices from New York City to Princeton, and I was introduced to Ivy League. And so what I learned very quickly was there's a difference between how well you were educated, what you knew, how smart you were, and the Ivy League or community that you were in. So those people who had graduated inside of the Merrill Lynch and Wall Street environment, from Harvard, from Princeton, from Cambridge, from the MIT even, they had networks that really helped them get ahead in a way that other people did not. And so I see the value. I think if you're going to invest in a college education, that's really kind of one way to think about it, is the network that you're building when you're in college. And not that you can't build it on your own.
It's just harder, isn't it? But I guess if you don't have the funds or the existing network to get access to some of those places, you're kind of locked out.
Yeah. And I did get a scholarship to Amherst, actually, but it required me to go back and delete the years that I had advanced in my career. And so I had to make a decision at a young age. It's like, do I go to Amherst and get the education that I think I would have been fantastic, or do I keep going on this fast path? So I opted for the fast track and just get on in the working world. But you never know how your life would be different if you took road A versus road B.
Sliding doors moment. Yeah. This gold bug that you worked with, did what they were saying resonate at all with you, or did it feel quite old fashioned and antiquated as you're looking at modern finance? Did the concept of gold at the time feel a lot more antiquated than it does now in the context of Bitcoin?
That's a really interesting question, Gary. And yes, it does. I think I'd never really thought about gold. Bill was kind of the crazy guy of the group. He'd stand on the corner and just gaze in the sunshine. And so he was almost like a guru. And he did very well for his investors, especially at that time. But yeah, it seemed like it was, I just thought stocks and options, and especially the index options coming on board, board and all that was so much more exciting and tangible in a way. Even the gold was something that was physical. It did feel that that was a little out of sync or out of place. But of course, again, economics and just, looking at everything that was going on in the economy at the time. Now that I look back on it, it's like I should have paid a little bit more attention to that part of the portfolio.
I guess you didn't have any real reason
Yeah.
to at the time, did you? I
Yeah.
mean, again,
Everything
it
was
sounded
working
like,
in the fiat world.
yeah. In Merrill Lynch in the Brave New World, gold was just something quite old-fashioned and to be respected and part of someone's portfolio, but not where the future was heading. And yet, I don't know how many years ago that was, but it's probably held in a higher regard today than it was then.
And also, I think I've always tended to be very much of an optimist. And I think in just that personal nature, that gold as an investment was always a hedge against bad things happening too. And so from that perspective, perhaps it didn't resonate with me as much as some of the other more kind of exciting investments did.
Yeah. Without jumping straight into Bitcoin, I guess there's elements of Bitcoin that have that as well, right? As in, for some people, it's a hedge against everything else falling apart as much as it is the great things that Bitcoin can do as well.
Absolutely. And I do think that, Bitcoin it's like, I don't know, a diamond or something that has so many different facets. So you might become attracted to it from a human rights perspective, from number go up, or for me, it was technology that really fascinated me. And that's what got me interested in Bitcoin. So I wasn't even thinking, even though I have a degree in economics and because of my background, that wasn't the initial appeal of Bitcoin to me. So it was solving the value to value transfer on the internet issue that really resonated with me and attracted me. And then the economics part and everything else came later, as we all do. We just become, so curious about the many benefits of Bitcoin. And so the economic part of it came later in my Bitcoin journey.
And talking about the technology side of it, obviously Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency. Lots of others came along and purported to have quicker transactions, more transactions, whatever it may be. Did any of those turn your head? Did you look at other cryptos from a purely technological perspective? Maybe some of the others might be able to do something Bitcoin doesn't, or were you
No,
always
yeah, yes,
laser-eyed?
I did. And specifically from that, and when I bought Bitcoin in the beginning, which was early 2013, there wasn't anything else. And so it was, fascinating to me. And then Ethereum, when that came out and it broke off of Bitcoin really, with Vitalik having first worked in Bitcoin. And then I thought, well, this is really interesting. So I did get Ethereum on the initial token offering or whatever it was called at the time. And then as other chains started to develop, I tracked them and I followed them, and at the time I was launching my venture capital fund too. So I didn't have the time or mental bandwidth to really follow everything. And it just felt like it was all moving so fast that to follow it was like a fire hose. I tried to, but so I had some of them, but then as I really, really sharpened my focus on it, it became clear to me that Bitcoin was the winner, and I just kind of let loose of the others. But I would say it's a journey that a lot of us take. I never was, I didn't have the terrible experiences of rug pulls and bad things, and I never was a trader either. So I would buy some and just kind of hold on to it or explore the technology and see how it could work. And then I just saw the disappointments from a technology standpoint, that the promises really weren't being executed on, and the numbers didn't make sense. I mean, just the amounts of money that was being raised in that. And having a venture capital firm, I was really looking a lot at the tokenomics of how these companies were raising. I mean, here I was trying to raise, I don't know, $5 million for a very valid company in Mexico, and they're raising, $120 million for some, concept that I just couldn't get my head around the numbers making sense from a business standpoint for early stage investing. So that was a disconnect that made me, I think, see more clearly what was wrong with some of these cryptos.
Yeah, but that's really interesting to hear that slightly alternative perspective, because I think for the majority of individuals that found their way into Bitcoin, the number go up aspect of it was probably the main one, which is why also a lot of Bitcoiners, me included, dabbled with other cryptos on the basis that they might earn more fiat. We all learn the lesson eventually, which is there is no second best, as Saylor would say. But it's interesting, even from your perspective, from the pure technological aspect, that you came to the same conclusion pretty quickly. The only difference is your fingers weren't financially burned probably as much as some of the rest of us.
Yeah. And probably because I just wasn't spending, I wasn't trading. So I think that was one. But, and to your point, Gary, I mean, I think we had our token experience, but I'm looking at everything that's happening today. And first of all, I'm super curious, and I'm very much a believer of companies having Bitcoin on their treasury, because I think it's actually going to change the way companies are financed and self-finance in the end, and give them a lot more autonomy. But I get a little concerned. It's like the merging of two worlds, because like preferred stocks, I worked in preferred in my early years on Wall Street because interest rates were so high, and it was a way of getting income, but also having some participation in the upside. But during that, I don't know, 20-year period where interest rates were at zero, you never heard the term preferred stock. And so it was almost like when Saylor announced the preferred stocks of MicroStrategy, it was like people are like, what's a preferred stock? And I'm like, wow, that takes me way back. And same thing with convertible bonds. So it's almost like dusting off a lot of these financial instruments that had been very popular at one time and are now reemerging and being remade, but with the kicker of options. And I get a little just intuitively concerned that we might end up with too many derivatives around companies with Bitcoin strategies, not taking anything away from strategy itself. But I feel that this next year will have so many different variations that it will be that not all of them will succeed in the same way that strategy did, or that some of the other ones similar. And it's just that there's the financialization of the Bitcoin company stocks or treasury stocks. I don't know. It gives me a little bit of pause.
And then you've got GameStop that rocketed on the basis that they've said they'll buy Bitcoin. I don't think they have yet, though, have they?
They have not announced anything as of today. No, they haven't.
No. So with your extensive background in TradFi, then, what's your view on the blurring of the lines, let's call it that, between self-custody Bitcoin in your own hardware wallet versus, iBit with BlackRock? How do you see the line between the two?
Well, I'm 100% self-custody if you can. And I do recognize that in the case of some institutions and even family offices where you have multiple ownership or mixed ownership, that it might be difficult to do that. But this is where I think some of the innovation in multi-institutional custody, or even things like Anchor Watch with insured custody, I think that we're going to see more and more products that help people have a more secure form of custody than self-storage. But if you're able to do it, I think having your own wallet and having your own keys is the essence of Bitcoin. I think it gives you full control. It's not peer-to-peer if you don't have complete control over your own Bitcoin. So ETFs serve a purpose for institutional investors, but I'd never recommend an individual. Like if I had a friend that said, I want to buy Bitcoin, but I want to buy the ETF, I'd say, really don't do it. Just find a different way to buy it directly and a custody solution that you're comfortable with. But I see no reason to do an ETF unless you're an entity that's prohibited somehow from directly owning Bitcoin.
The other thing is, if someone has a pension that they can't get access to, then obviously in America, putting that into a Bitcoin ETF or strategy is you don't have the option of having spot Bitcoin in a wrapper like a pension. If someone is putting money in every month, if they're dollar cost averaging, then a 100% spot Bitcoin in a hardware wallet is really from every angle, really. There's no fees involved. Whereas iBit charge what? I don't know what their annual fund fee is.
I think it's like 0.5% a year. Yeah. It's like a management fee.
Yeah, it's and there is always that additional risk that something there could go wrong. Self-custody has risks, but different solutions are coming to the market and making it easier for people to reduce the risk of losing keys. And multi-sig is obviously a much safer way of safeguarding that while still controlling your own destiny.
I think this is where there's a big need for innovation, and I see a lot of innovation occurring in different custody solutions and wallets. Like even the BitKey by Square is something that I gave for Christmas presents this year because I've been giving my niece and nephew. My nephew's extremely technically, I mean, he's like an AI programmer. My niece, not as technical, but very curious. And I've been giving them Bitcoin for years. I mean, it's just the mandatory gift that I give everybody. And then
You'd be an amazing auntie.
but but now it's like, okay, hardware wallet time, you got to control it. But I gave and I even told my nephew, I said, you can have a choice if you want something, if you want to upgrade from there. And I even told my niece, I said, well, maybe put a little bit of it on here and test it out. And she's like, bam, just all, just right from Coinbase to that, without blinking. So
I use the BitKey. I think it's fantastic because it's
easy.
Yeah, before that I had a hardware wallet that, I just had the stress of where do I keep those words and how do I keep them safe and secure from, burning down, being lost, being stolen. And in the end, that caused me to lose more sleep than the slight compromise of going with, a risk of a third party holding one of my keys, as it were.
And inheritance planning too. I mean, I think, you think not only of yourself, but you think of what you ultimately, how you want to pass Bitcoin. And, anybody can get hit by a bus. So it's not necessarily that, but, how is your partner set up in terms of Bitcoin education or comfort level, or your kids or your whatever? And you're doing a disservice to say to somebody, go and dig up the keys in the backyard near the third oak tree and then figure out how to do it. So it's like you're putting your Bitcoin at risk that way.
That was the other thing that was crossing my mind, not just I need to look after these words, but actually I need to make sure my wife, potentially my kids, know how to access this, because if suddenly I'm not here, it's just a piece of paper with some words on it. So yeah, I think the BitKey works well, and there will be other better solutions coming along, I'm sure, in the future. So can we wind back the clock a little bit then, Lynne, and just go back to how you first discovered Bitcoin and what the story is there?
Yeah, it's a story I love to tell. Well, I was launching my venture capital fund. So after I left Wall Street, I was living in Mexico and started seeing a unique opportunity in that at that time in Silicon Valley, there were a lot of tech companies getting started at lower capital costs. Cloud storage was coming on, so you didn't have to buy your own servers to start a tech company. Y Combinator and Techstars were starting. So it was like the emergence of small early stage tech companies. And I saw an opportunity in Mexico that the demographic was just incredible in terms of, I think, half the population under the age of 30, no one had landlines. Everybody was mobile and was accustomed to mobile and did business on mobile and communicated. And so I just thought it's just only natural that Mexico and LATAM would have an emerging tech economy. And I started a venture capital fund to invest in early stage startups in Mexico. And as part of that, I had a conference. And the idea of the conference was to bring together investors from Silicon Valley to come down to Mexico and see what was going on in terms of innovation in Mexico and with these startups. And it was a small conference limited to 150 people in a very beautiful elite resort. And it was very casual. There were no demo days or people pitching. It was more conversations between, those with experience and those that were getting started. And so when I was the second year of my conference, I was recommended by one of the investors in my fund to talk to Shak Khan. And Shak Khan is out of the UK. He's early stage seed investor. And he was at that time a big investor and advisor to Spotify and Daniel Ek. And so I thought that was where the conversation would be, what he would speak about, because Spotify was really just taking off at that time. It was 2013, 2012. And we got on the phone and he said, actually, what I'd like to talk about is Bitcoin. He said, have you heard of it? And I'm like, nope, haven't heard anything about it. And he said, well, I've recently been introduced to it. It fascinates me. And I'm having a hard time finding information about Bitcoin. There's GitHub and there's technical resources, but there's nothing that's kind of more generally accessible and available. So he was launching CoinDesk, and that launched in I don't know, mid 2013, and our conference was in November 2013, and this was December 2012 that we were talking. And he said, I really think Bitcoin is super interesting, and I'd like to talk about that. And I'm like, well, what is it? And when he described it to me, and I still remember like where I was sitting in my house and just like, I don't know, it was hard to even concentrate because it was like my head was just kind of connecting these dots about what could this be? So after we hung up, I started exploring it, and I couldn't find Coinbase had launched just like a month earlier, but I wasn't able to buy it based on, my VPN, or I didn't have a VPN. And so it was like my internet address in Mexico, even though I had a bank account in the US, it was like until I physically went to the US, could I make that transaction work and buy Bitcoin? But yeah, it was fascinating. For whatever reason, it connected with me immediately. I think the Wall Street background and being involved in the early internet, just the architecture. I mean, I also was an early internet company founder, but understanding that commerce was very difficult at the beginning. And I saw that Bitcoin had the potential of solving some of these problems of the transfer of value that the internet had promised but was never able to deliver on. And so I thought obviously that gives it tremendous potential from a price standpoint, but more intriguing to me was kind of the next layer of the internet. So that's how I became interested in it. And then the price, I mean, I think it was like $15 when Shock and I first had that conversation. And then it was like 120 when I was able to buy it. And I'm questioning, is it too late? And even I still have the clip from the conference that we had in November, and where Shock was being interviewed. And by that time, the price was kind of on a tear. I think it was like 250 by that time. And they're like, well, it's appreciated so much. Is it too late? Shock, looked at the room, and this is like 150 people, but some of the top VCs from Silicon Valley. And he said, how many of you have heard about Bitcoin? And pretty much all the hands went up. And he said, how many of you own Bitcoin? And it was like 5 people, myself proudly included in that 5 that, raised their hands. And he said, you're some of the most technologically sophisticated people in the world. And he said, you know about it, but you haven't invested it. But just think, if this does catch on, and how many, what the price has the potential of doing. And so it was interesting. But it was a moment that I remember specifically where I was when I first heard about it.
You mentioned they're moving to Mexico. There's probably an interesting story behind that as well, Lynne, is there?
Yeah, I guess it was the escape of Wall Street. But I don't know, at a certain point, I mean, I started my career with Merrill Lynch in Jacksonville, Florida, and I moved to New York, and I was really on a tear with Merrill Lynch, and opened an office in Chicago. I was traveling all the time. And, at a very young age, I just became a very nasty person to airline employees, and just, I just was full of myself. I was becoming a person I did not like. And
in what way, or what do you think was causing
entitled,
right,
arrogant,
okay,
felt I was important, I was impatient. And I don't know, it was just at some point I just thought, I don't even know myself anymore, and I just don't like the person I'm becoming. And even just the people all around me, just the day-to-day, the office, it was all and there's a saying at Merrill, it was like, what have you done for me today? And, it was just that super, financial, transactional world of Wall Street. And it's like I was supported and assisted by a lot of great mentors and people, but there was nothing human about it. It was all about, just the money. So something in that just did not, I just felt like I had to leave. And I started by taking a leave of absence of like 7 months, and I taught scuba diving in different places in the world and traveled around a little bit, and ended up coming back.
Was there an element of burnout there as well, or was it just a reflection that I don't like the person I'm becoming, I need to step back?
Well, I thought it may have been burnout, thus the sabbatical that I took, but I don't think it was so much. I think it really was. I did not like the person I was becoming. And not that everybody was bad. I had some wonderful cohorts and people there. But for me personally, it was like, how am I spending my life energy? And is it just about chasing the next transaction, or how much profit can you squeeze out of this or that? It just didn't feel that was quite right.
Do you think, here's a question that you've just made me think about. So those kind of behaviors that are often associated with, high flying, successful, very fiat rich people, they become a bit arrogant, entitled. Do you think as the Bitcoin price continues to increase, that the majority of Bitcoiners will have those same attributes? Or do you think the journey you go on as a Bitcoiner means that your approach to your self-reflection, your approach to life and others would make you less likely to have those personality traits?
Such a wonderful question, Gary. And I don't know the answer to it, but I would tend to think, I mean, if you really do study Bitcoin and you study why it's successful, because it's replacing some of the inequalities and abuses that the traditional financial system has made, just kind of the norm. But it also goes into, I mean, some of the things that I've learned about are, and probably the most impactful book I've read in the Bitcoin space is Saifedean's Fiat Standards. So not the Bitcoin standard, but probably because it came out after I was already a Bitcoiner, so I had less to learn from that book. But I learned so much from the Fiat Standard, and actually was part of his study course on it, which I'd recommend to anybody, where you really go through the lectures with him. But architecture, education, healthcare, food, our whole food system, it's like all of these other touch points that you never necessarily attach to, money, have everything to do with money and corporate control, or just how a broken money system impacts us. And then Lynn Alden's book, also Broken Money, touches on many of these same things too. But I think that the average person, myself included, didn't really connect those dots about how it impacts it. So what I was seeing and feeling on Wall Street was directly tied to just the advancing of that broken money system, and that somehow didn't resonate with me. So I think that when you do study Bitcoin, and you start to have this understanding, and the time preference too just changes you. So, the time preference on Wall Street was very much, oh, a bigger car, bigger house, bigger, more of this, more of that. And Bitcoin's the opposite. So, when you have a value that is, that is scarce an asset, I mean, you trade off. I mean, I trade off, even like think about have a coffee. It's like, oh no, maybe not. It's like coffee at home, and there's these little daily things that you think about that just it really changes you.
It's easy to stereotype, but I think people that are driven by fiat money are looking for the bigger house, the promotion, the more money, the more flashy holiday, nicer car, etc. Whereas I think those people might find their way into Bitcoin trying to get more fiat because they'll see the number go up aspect. But actually, I think once you really go down the mine, all those the branches of the Bitcoin tree that you've articulated, that once people understand that and really get embedded within it, often it makes them completely reassess their life, basically. And rather than wanting the bigger house, the flasher car, the better holidays, I think actually I can get off this treadmill. In Bitcoin might enable me to follow a passion project, be altruistic, help other people with the wealth that I'm creating, rather than just flagrantly show off the wealth I've got to everyone externally to try and validate how successful I've been.
You know what I've noticed also, Gary, and I don't know if it's directly tied, but I just find that people in Bitcoin, my Bitcoin friends go to conferences. There's and then if I go into other parts of my life and I'm just with people who are not yet into Bitcoin and they're more just the level of anxiety. I just feel like there's a higher level of anxiety of chasing something that is kind of elusive or escaping, which is the value of the dollar. And it's like a treadmill that you can't get off, where in the Bitcoin community, if you will, it feels like people, once they're introduced to Bitcoin, they just have, it's almost like you take a deep sigh of relief, and it's like, oh, now I understand it. Now I can feel comfortable just holding this one asset and understanding that over time, everything's going to be okay, that I don't have to, become a stockbroker just to figure out how to invest my 401k or my pension or whatever. You're just like, I don't have to have two jobs, my regular job plus the job of managing money, because the money's going to be okay. The financial part of it's going to be okay.
Do you have any worries at all about that? Do you ever have days or moments in a day where something makes you doubt maybe Bitcoin won't be the future? Maybe I've over allocated in this asset and something might go wrong?
I've certainly posed the question to myself, and I've had family members and friends pose that question to me. Very concerned that I'm
Yeah,
a
yeah,
little
yeah.
too all in on this. But think I think it's just that over time I've had experiences in my life where I've been introduced to things. Well, for example, the internet. When the internet first came out, it was kind of like I saw this flash and I could understand what the potential was, and I saw it so clearly. But serious business people didn't take it seriously. Same thing with social media. It was like when social media, I got on social media to communicate with my nephew who was in college, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing how this can change all the way advertising, communication, everything. And in both of those cases, I saw it, but I didn't trust myself enough. I didn't have the conviction that I was seeing something differently than other people were seeing. And all the dismissive talk around me, I let that weigh in and cloud my vision of what I could see. And in both cases, obviously, we know what happened. But so when Bitcoin came out, I just made a decision that I know what I see. And I had the experience of seeing technology shifts before and not missing them totally, but not going full in. And so this time, right or wrong, it's like I'm all in because I know what I see. But I do think that, connecting the dots of the different various experiences of my life, having worked in traditional finance, worked in technology, lived in an emerging economy. So I have more of a global picture of what pain points there are in the rest of the world, not in the, modernized financial world of the US or Europe, that I understand what Bitcoin can do for money all over the world.
How many of your ex-colleagues in New York City at Merrill Lynch, how many of them do you think are considered Bitcoin now because it's too, let's not call it mainstream, but when the president of the United States is talking about a strategic Bitcoin reserve, everyone in Merrill Lynch must have had a conversation. But I'd be interested to know your thoughts on how many, as a crude percentage, how many do you think have got some kind of allocation in it versus the people that are still writing it off as a magic internet money? It's a fad. It's not real. It doesn't exist.
I don't know, and I really didn't stay in touch with my Merrill Lynch cohorts, but living in Punta Mita, Mexico, which is a resort community, that's where I held the Mita Tech Talks, and my social group there, all very affluent people from US, Canada, and Mexico. So a little bit of an older demographic, super successful, a lot of oil and gas, technology, traditional industry. My friends advise me not to talk about Bitcoin too much when I go to cocktail parties and things like this because it's like I'll go on a tear. But people think I'm crazy. And so I would say very, very small percentage. If you've really been successful in traditional finance, you don't have a reason to look at it. Now there's a little bit more of a curiosity since the ETFs, since more TradFi, since people like Larry Fink and Paul Tudor Jones are talking about Bitcoin. It's like those voices are validating what I've been saying, but still, there's still this sense that I can't touch it. I don't know it. It's got to be false. So I'd say very few. I think younger generations are easier. They grew up digital, so they understand the concept of digital financial transactions. But I think it's a demographic change.
Yeah. And the people that are earning top dollar, as much as they're worth, their wealth is still being eaten away by the dollar debasement. At this point, they don't have the need as someone in a country where, their currency is being debased at 20, 30, 40 times the rate. They've got more need to get out of that currency and find either a stable coin or increasingly Bitcoin.
And also, I think in traditional finance, like Jamie Dimon is such a curious case. I mean, for sure, he must understand it, but I don't know if it's just the disconnect because it's such a threat. When you think about banking, like every time I still occasionally need to send a wire transfer and it's $25 and it's like, why is it $25 or $17.50 or whatever? It's like, why does it even cost anything to make a ledger entry digital from, I mean, it just makes zero sense. And then wait a few days. It's like when I understand what Bitcoin can do. So just the fee revenue, Western Union transactions throughout, for remittances and emerging economies, it's like there's so many ways it'll disrupt that I don't know if the incumbents are just intentionally, if they're so fearful that they're intentionally dismissive of the technology because they don't want to believe the fact that their whole business will change.
Even just foreign exchange, going on a holiday from UK to USA or the other way, the costs and the fees involved, it's all just non-productive, wasted money, isn't it? It's
Yes.
really, it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
It's just lining the pockets of those institutions. And it's a service. Those aspects are credible business opportunities. It's not like they're robbing people. There's still other companies can come in and undercut them. But the point is, it's going to be completely disrupted and to the point of oblivion once the world is on a Bitcoin standard. No one will want to be swapping their dollars for pounds because they'll just be transacting in Bitcoin.
Yeah. And there's so many of those services now that do that with Bitcoin as the underlying technology, and you can just move. I mean, settlement days. I mean, it takes 7 days settlement, and I see the money out of my account and out of my bank account, like immediately, and yet it doesn't appear. And it's like the float on that cash. It's just the way that Bitcoin financial rails improve the efficiency, reduce the costs is just unbelievable. That when big businesses do catch on, it'll be, I think, a rapid transition.
Yeah, I have a slight conspiracy theory as well that the people like Jamie Dimon probably have been stacking it personally for a while.
Peter Schiff too. I mean, I think some of these players, they're going to have Elizabeth Warren. They're probably going to come out as some of the top Bitcoin address holders.
Yeah, he does it just for engagement, doesn't he? I mean, it's almost a joke now, I think. Like, there's no way Peter Schiff doesn't own Bitcoin.
His son's a Bitcoiner, yeah. What is a Shakespearean quote about thou doth protest too much?
He should just be being quiet now rather than doubling down. The work you're involved in now, Lynne, the companies you're working with and these tech founders working with Bitcoin, what kind of exciting things do you think are going to be coming to normal people like me who are interested in Bitcoin? What kind of things do you think in the next 3 to 5 years are going to blow us all away?
Yeah, I recently gave a talk about this, and I kind of divide them into 3 big buckets. I mean, the first one are kind of what I would say the more boring but the very necessary infrastructure improvements. So just like we were talking about, wallets or even moving money from one place to another, there's still a lot of improvement. If you go to, to talk to somebody about buying Bitcoin that is not a Bitcoiner, and then all of a sudden you have this concept of the keys, the private keys, this, that, so custodialship, owning, buying, holding, moving. There's still so much that needs to be done in the infrastructure way. And I think that's the early one. And I think companies like Fold is a great example that has an easy way to onboard people through gift cards and through rewards programs, and then expanding the financial services beyond that. I think in all realms, from just the very easy transactions, even Thunder Games is another one that I love. That's allows you to earn Bitcoin when you're playing games, everything from interactive games to, your mom playing solitaire on the computer. Instead of just put her in Thunder Games and she earns Bitcoin.
How does that work commercially then? If my mum's playing solitaire, what's that proof of work that then earns sats?
Time spent on the game. I would imagine there's an advertising model that the advertisers pay some of the stats. It's like there's a app that I check into every single day called Smiles, and it's a step tracker. And I do it because I like to track, how much I walk every day. It's S Smiles, and I don't know where the Bitcoin comes from, and it's not much, but it's like I get 10 sats a day or whatever, just for checking in, and I'm doing something that I would do normally, but I'm earning sats for it. And so, it's like those sorts. And Guy Swan has, I think, I think he tracks all these ways that you can earn free sats across various platforms. And I need to it's on my to-do list for one weekend. I'm just going to find all the ways I can, even just like I shop on Amazon, I should buy the Amazon gift cards that pay me sats and things like that. But anyway, I digress. But I do think a lot of infrastructure, there's still so much that needs to be done to improve the basic experience of buying, interacting, and holding Bitcoin. Second one that I get really excited about is micropayments. And I have a kind of a pet peeve, and every month, I think a lot of us do this. You look at you go through your accounts, and you have Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube Music, Apple Music, or Apple TV, Netflix. You have all these subscriptions, and that's just on entertainment side. And then you also have like whatever work subscriptions, Dropbox, this, that. So you're just kind of your monthly amounts of what you pay for, and often you don't have any option of just buying it full out. I mean, you have to subscribe, and and then do you use it or not? I mean, how much are you really using it? Well, the whole concept of micropayments, I can't wait till this gets incorporated. So if I watch a movie on Netflix, I pay for that movie, but I only pay, and if I don't like the movie, I only pay for the time that I watch it. It was never possible before because of the transaction fees on Visa, MasterCard, and subscription. But on a Bitcoin standard, if things are tied to Bitcoin over Lightning, you can pay only for the amount of entertainment that you use. Same thing with articles that you read. So instead of having the paywalls for Financial Times or this and that, you can access anything, but you just pay for the articles that you read. I think it also encourages a higher standard of information, journalism, entertainment, music, so that those who are really attracting audiences get paid directly for them. And I think it's going to radically change everything, just like internet changed the model from consumption of print magazines and newspapers and CDs to digital. This is the next shift in that, where it will go to micropayments, paying just based on your actual consumption of products.
There's a app called Fountain, which I
Yes,
don't know if you
I use it.
I only
Yes.
found out recently. It's a UK company, and I had a chat with one of the founders of it. So it was amazing for me to find out actually the guy that runs it is an hour's drive away from me, and it works exactly the same way. So you can
Yes.
there are certain podcast providers that will pay you sats to listen to their podcast. If you listen for 30 seconds, you don't get it. If you listen for the whole hour, you'll get it incrementally. And likewise, you can, some people will get paid, make a number up, 200 sats for listening to an episode, but that might then say, that was such a great episode, I'm going to donate 300 sats back to the podcast host, or so it's value for value, isn't it? And it's
Yes.
and it's a completely revolutionized approach to all of those subscription models that you discussed, and I think the public will get behind it. I think it's much more genuine, it's much more authentic, and as you say, it will drive quality, no doubt.
Yeah. No, I love Fountain. I try and listen to that specifically for that, because it's kind of spurring it. And then Rumble, I believe, also is incorporating a model. They just had a major investment by Tether, and so they're incorporating a wallet into the Rumble platform, which is kind of the alternative to YouTube. So I think, it's these sorts of new innovative services that will kind of supplant some of the traditional ones. But I think there's enormous opportunity in these, and also just in ways of perhaps incorporating the Bitcoin payment backend into these platforms like a Netflix or a whatever. So maybe maybe there's a step in where Netflix will say you can subscribe on a monthly basis, or you can pay us just based on your consumption. And to be honest, it's like, I'm sure that chargebacks for a lot of these companies, not making the payment or payments, the credit card payment doesn't go through. It's like, these are ways that they get immediate settlement, and they could generate more revenue from different parts of the world that are not as credit card accessible. So, like, I think even in Mexico, I think it's only like 50% or less of the population has a credit card. So and I'm sure you echo that in like India and Taiwan and different places, that just a lot of the African countries, a lot of the LATAM countries, that access to credit cards are just not easy. So this opens that model up.
Yeah. And of course, I'm sure those platforms always do 60 days free or whatever. And that's just giving away their service for nothing. And then however many percentage of people will cancel. And of course, these days, with certainly in the UK, the cost of living crisis, people will be cancelling their Amazon Prime or their Netflix, Disney. There are so many of these services now that actually, if there's a great series that's just started on Netflix, most people I think would rather just pay to watch that for a reasonable price rather than signing up and committing to. And then, of course, for some of them are so disingenuous. If you want to cancel a subscription, you have to make a phone call or send, and it's, come on, really? It took me 10 seconds to sign up and commit to this thing, and now you're asking me to phone within the hours of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. I mean, come on. It's so disingenuous, it stinks. But yeah.
Oh, I hate that. I can't wait till it's fixed. And then the third bucket is actually kind of an extension of this whole micropayment concept that I'm so enthralled by, but that's AI agents. And I mean, it's just so obvious and so natural that Bitcoin will be the natural payment platform for AI. And it's technology, it's immediate settlement, the micropayment aspect of it. But I can just see instead of us subscribing to services like an OpenAI or Grok or whatever and paying a monthly fee, same thing, we'll pay only for what we use. But as we start to evolve the AI ecosystem where we will have agents that will go and conduct business for us or make our travel reservations, and we're just scratching the surface, but I think that it will enable so much more personal and professional productivity. But the natural form of their payment will be Bitcoin. It's like a wallet that's either funded or, and the human interaction will only come from how much you decide to allocate to the AI agent to do whatever task you're doing or researching. And then the rest will be conducted but on a Bitcoin standard. And it just makes all the sense in the world that I just feel that while so many people are looking at corporate treasury adoption or nation state adoption, that I think perhaps one of the biggest buckets of adoption and driving the Bitcoin price in terms of usage will be AI agents. And
Yeah,
same with payments.
fascinating.
I mean, there's a lot of conversation about, is Bitcoin a store of value or a method of payment? And I think that we're looking in terms of payments like, will it replace Visa, or can we use a wallet, or do we want to buy a coffee with Bitcoin? I think we're looking at the wrong scenario in that case. I think the micropayment application of Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin is such a new payment technology or financial technology that we're not thinking in the right places. It's the same thing like the internet. The first newspapers on the internet used to look like a newspaper, and you had to like flip the page and read it just like the newspaper, where they were thinking about it the wrong way. And now the evolution of reading and information online is totally different. And that's what I think will happen with Bitcoin as a payment. It will be these new aspects of Bitcoin that have never been allowed or enabled with regular payment features because of the expense and the complexity of our current system. But Bitcoin, as we have the infrastructure and we have the rails to enable it, will just interact and pay for things in a much different way.
And are there any specific companies that you're working with at the moment where you're really excited about the project they're working on?
Some of these technologies I'm not yet seeing. I mean, I guess Thunder Games, which I mentioned already, is a company that, and most of these are privately held companies, but Bitcoin venture funds are investing in them. I really love that one because I think they are kind of remaking. They're one of the cutting edge on micropayments, and they're doing it through gaming, porn. These are aspects that they kind of lead the way in terms of technology adoption. So I like Thunder Games a lot. Another company that I like, and this is a little bit different. It's not really micropayments, but Anchor Watch, which is the insurance company only available currently in the US, but they've got the Lloyd's of London coverage, and we talked a little bit about feeling secure with your Bitcoin. And so this prevents it from being stolen, or I guess being lost, just depending on the circumstances. I'm not sure the things, but it's the use of Bitcoin mini script. So it is a smart contract inside of Bitcoin that's really enabling you to pass it on. I mean, I look at it as kind of the hack on that. It's an insurance policy, but it's also an inheritance planning tool that I think is really effective. So the technology that they implemented in Miniscript, I think, is exciting. I mean, there are another one is Simple Proof, which is a Guatemalan company that did election verification for Guatemala, and then they later did it for a county in Georgia. But it takes information, and with all the controversy right now, but it puts it on the Bitcoin blockchain for verification of information, but it does it in a Merkle tree structure so that the actual amount that's being written in the block space is really small, but it has like a list of records. And you could envision this in terms of not just voting records, but also driver's license records. And, I think as AI, deep fakes become more prolific, that our own identity will become necessarily tied to some form of verification on the Bitcoin blockchain because it is immutable. And so I think if there's a personal ID that can be locked on that, then you can see if the ID key is attached to your video so that you know the representation of that person speaking is truly tied to their ID verification. But I mean, a podcast that I co-host with Israel Munoz, Build with Bitcoin, that's what we do is we just talk with all of the companies that we're introduced to. In fact, I'd love an introduction to Fountain because we haven't had them on, but they're on our list of people that we want to talk to. But we try and talk to, and what was interesting when we first thought about this, we weren't sure what the universe was of startups and of profitable startups and startups. But actually, it's just like, it's exciting. I mean, there's a lot out there. And so we hope to really be able to elevate the profiles and the stories of these founders about how they came to think about it. Obviously lending right now, lending on Bitcoin, having secured and responsible lending to take to extract some of the value out of your Bitcoin if you have a medical emergency, want to buy a house, have, whatever that should be able to be done. And so lending platforms are kind of something that we're seeing a lot of, and basic infrastructure companies, but also on the AI side, there's one called Cascader out of Austin that is almost like a marketplace of AI tools. And so they're new, and some tools work better than others, but it's certainly the direction that I think is exciting that we can go into. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of fun things.
It's amazing, and it's quite frustrating as a UK resident when I hear some of those stories, because we're still under tight legislation. There aren't the freedoms in place that there are in other countries.
Mexico even has some more restricted things, but this is where I think El Salvador has such an exciting future, and they're attracting such big tech companies, including companies like Google and Amazon are building infrastructure services with AI. But I do see a clear intersection between AI and Bitcoin, so it makes sense. But the whole Kubo program of educating their students on deep tech, from elementary school on, the tax breaks for starting businesses there, some of the innovation that we see. We just recently talked to a company out of El Salvador, Ditto Banks, that's kind of a neobank that's operating in, I think, 9 countries already, but a full suite of financial services all on Bitcoin rails that you don't necessarily know about. But I think you'll see that we're starting to look for and find companies to talk to in Africa, which I think is another place that a lot of innovation is happening because of the need. I mean, it's like when you look at it, it's like US and UK, they don't really have needs. They don't have the same level of problems that people in emerging.
Urgency. There's still arguably the need, but people don't realize they have that need right now. Yeah. Fascinating. Well, I'll be conscious of your time, Lynne. I'll draw the conversation to a close with the question I ask all my guests, which is, what's one belief you held before Bitcoin that you've completely changed your mind about?
Well, there are a lot. I think Bitcoin is such a great educator. I mentioned earlier the Fiat Standard, which is a book I'd encourage everyone to read, just about how the broken money system impacts so many things that you don't necessarily draw a line to. But I think probably the biggest change of beliefs is that we had institutions like the IMF and the World Bank that were benevolent institutions that were helping raise up economies that were less privileged and that needed help. And Alex Gladstein is just a hero to me, and his writing and his work in this area. And of course, living in Mexico and raising my venture fund in Mexico, we ran into the IADB and in the World Bank, and they had funding programs to help emerging economies and companies and that. And I used to think they were like the real good guys that were, providing help and assistance. But after educating myself on some of the programs and some of the costs to the countries, and you see it in Venezuela, you see it in Argentina, that those institutions need to just be totally blown up and go away. And that was something that I had no idea how turned around my thinking was about those institutions. So
yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, that's very true. These institutions that are there to help often doing completely the opposite.
Yes. That's why I'm such a champion. I love what I'm seeing occur in El Salvador. I've been down there almost every year since 2021 when they announced the Bitcoin initiative. And I really cheer on that country. I just think, just talking to the people on the ground and just seeing transformational changes in a country that's exercising their sovereignty and their independence and thinking differently about it, I think is just a beautiful example. And I hope that more countries have that example of just being more independent and just kind of tapping into the desires of the citizens, but creating a safe environment and an environment of hope. I mean, that's what I think Bitcoin really brings. As I mentioned, the level of anxiety among my Bitcoin friends versus my non-Bitcoin friends, I just see if we can elevate that on a world level where we have that much more hope and less stress about financial security and more opportunity, then it's one of the reasons I want to devote so much of my time and energy to Bitcoin, because I do think it just creates a much more positive future for so many more people, not just for an elite few, but for the majority of individuals in the world.
Yeah, it doesn't discriminate, does it? For someone in Africa who can stack 10 sats a month, like they can do that. They have access to Bitcoin the same as any of us. Whereas without going over old ground, the big organizations, the family offices, etc., get access to rates and early funding rounds of investments and all sorts that the general public just don't get anywhere near to. Yeah, Bitcoin's for everyone. Okay, so if people want to reach out to you, Lynne.
No, I think probably the best place is on X Twitter. I believe I've got a link in there with other links, but it's just, my DMs are open there, and that's a good place to reach me. And that I think has a link to the Build with Bitcoin podcast, and that has links. So yeah, that's probably a ground zero place.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks so much. It's been a really interesting conversation. Really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it so much. Thank you so much for having me on, Gary.